start making a list of like, what's the problem we're trying to solve and who can help us solve it and who knows who. And then you just lose any fear of conflict or rejection or anything. And you just pick up the phone or start sending out emails and then one thing leads to another and you start exploring. And I think you just do.
Hi, thanks for being here and welcome to Season 2 of The Founder Mindset, brought to you by ATB. I'm Leah Sarich, your host, and I'm super excited to talk to more founders about the human experience of being an entrepreneur. In this podcast, we're digging into what it really feels like to build a company from nothing. I was a broadcaster for over 20 years, so I've interviewed thousands of people, but entrepreneurs, not that many. And yet, they have the best stories. They're solving big problems, and they're creating incredible impact. But it is hard work. So why would they do this? Let's find out. Joining me in studio today is Nic Beique, founder and CEO of Helcim, a payments company that helps Canadian and American businesses accept credit cards at affordable and transparent rates. Hey, Nic.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. It's so great to have you in studio too.
Yeah, and I got a tour of the Thin Air Labs. And that was pretty exciting.
Ah, pretty cool, right?
It's cool to see just all these startups in Calgary, like, trying to find their space and then some of them growing into bigger ones. And it's exciting.
It really is exciting. It's so fun to see them right there and then see them grow up and mature and go out and leave the nest. It's wonderful.
If you think 10 years ago when I got into my first startup, there was so little in Calgary to the point where you would say, oh, I'm going to go in tech or I'm going to do my IT company or my tech company or whatever is the case. And people would look at you funny. Like, it's like, no, you graduated and then you went to oil and gas and you got a good job starting and that's what you did. And anything else like just made no sense.
Right? And I know this because I worked in television in this city for 20 years. And once I discovered the tech sector, I was like, wait a second, guys, how come we didn't have these people on our show like all the time? They have the best stories. And I phoned up all my friends at all the other TV stations. And I was like, did you guys know about this? And they were like, no. And I was like, me either. So I agree with you. I completely agree with you that it's really a sector it's coming alive right now.
Yeah, I remember looking up, this is about probably 8 years ago or something, about what news stories were made from like Alberta media on any kind of tech story. And we found 3, like literally 3. And there was one on the Smart board, like the Smart, which was
sure.
like an OG Calgary company.
Yep.
There was one on Solium, which became
Yep.
Shareworks.
Yep.
And there was one on like the early rise of Benevity. Wow. And it was like, that was it. There was just like a desert.
Only the ones that became the unicorns, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, we'll just have to create some more then.
Yeah, I think one thing that Calgary or just Alberta needs is that we don't have our own kind of media. And when I say media, it could be more newsletters or podcasts or whatever. There isn't enough of it that is kind of homegrown. Because if you think about it, like, Silicon Valley, they have TechCrunch, they have, like the Verge, they have so many things that surround that. There's a bit of a self-serving element. It gets to amplify the stories of their homegrown industry, right? And even in Canada, you have maybe like Beta Kit, but that's very Toronto based, and we kind of get the crumbs here, right?
Yeah.
But Alberta really hasn't, and it's good to see podcasts like this because we need more local media that talks about local tech. Because if not, like, nobody's going to do it for us, right? And we need to put a spotlight on these companies.
Agreed. I mean, that's one of the main reasons why we started a podcast like this and why Thin Air Labs hired a former journalist, and created a role called Head of Story, right? So we know we need that. So yeah, thank you again for doing it. And that's why we're here today. So why don't we go right back to the beginning? When did you first figure out that you wanted to be an entrepreneur? It started really early for you, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I was probably my first kind of foray into it. I was 15 years old and I started making websites. So this is like late 90s. I'm aging myself. But it was like at the time, everybody thought they needed a website. It was kind of like the .com bubble. And down to things that we kind of take for granted now, but like I would get my hair cut at my barber. And then, we get talking and I would say, I make websites. He's like, oh, well, can you make a website for me? I'll pay you a couple $100, right? And you're like, oh, okay. And then, and then the local gym and the local computer store. One of my first clients was I walked into, to those that are kind of Calgary based, they'll know Memory Express.
Oh, sure.
Like a computer store, right? And I walked in, there was one location. I went up to one of the brothers that were the owner, and I was like, your website is terrible. You have no e-commerce, and I'd love to build your website. And they actually hired me as a job. And this was in high school. So I kind of moved my classes around. I worked there in the afternoons for $8 an hour, and I started coding their website. So that's kind of how I got my entrepreneurial bug.
Yeah. Okay, but I need to like pull on a string there. Like you walked into the store and was like, "Hey, your website sucks. Let me fix it for you." Where did you get the moxie to do something like that?
I don't know. I'm still fairly introverted, but I had enough confidence about, the websites I was building, and it was a store I really liked, and I put the two and two together, and I don't know, I just got the guts to say it. And work there for, during a period of time in high school, and then realized like ultimately I like doing it on my own more, and kind of spun off. And that was probably the official forming of my first company, which was called Blue Sphere Graphics. I don't know why. Don't ask a 15-year-old like how they came up with a business name, and that was a web design company. And that's really, I love the fact I fell in love with just being an entrepreneur and be able to like have that success, and at a time being so young, yet, more established, real business people, real small businesses owners saying, yeah, I'll write you a check if you do this for me. And I thought that was so cool. And it just kind of evolved into, and then I fell in love with just working for myself, because I just felt like I could deliver on things. I had control, and something clicks where you just start thinking like, I'll never work for anybody else. Like I'll just do this thing.
I mean,
And
you touched on it briefly, but what is it that you love about just being your own boss and, not having to report to anybody?
I think there's a couple elements. There's an element of control, for better or for worse.
Yeah, sure.
It's funny because in one way you have less control, because you're hunting day to day to be able to feed yourself. And, you would think like a corporate structure where you get a job and work through a corporate ladder, like would give you more, or at least a clearer path. But you just feeling completely in control is a big thing. And the other thing was probably a little bit of a streak of anti-authority. I've never kind of shaken that off. I never did well in school. I always skipped class. I always want to do my own thing. I really always struggle when somebody told me what to do. I just wanted to do it my way. And, you mix those things together. And I think it's common. I think people look up to entrepreneurship, and yeah, because I mean, you see the big success stories and the hard work and the impact it can make. But I think that the commonality, I think with most entrepreneurs, that it doesn't feel like a choice, for better or for worse. They're just geared in a certain way where they wouldn't be able to be effective. I admire somebody that can build a big, beautiful career in a Fortune 500. Like, I don't think I have what it takes to do that. So I think it's just more about like being wired a certain way. And it's not about being better or worse. It's just being wired differently.
Right. It's not better or worse. It's just different. Yeah. To your point, having interviewed, many founders now, there is a common theme that runs through them. And you're right. I think they often say that phrase, I'm just wired a little differently.
If you think about entrepreneurship, it takes so many no's. It takes, like, if it was obvious, somebody else would be doing it. And half the time the ideas, or I mean, more than half the time, the ideas turn out to be terrible. And then you have to try something else. I had a lot of false starts before ultimately I founded Helcim. But you have to have something in you that is kind of like screaming against what actually makes sense.
Yes.
And then sometimes everything lines up and it makes sense. And then it makes sense in retrospective. But yeah.
Right. I loved what you said there, that if it was easy, somebody else would be doing it. But that takes a lot of courage then to have this vision and just keep going when, to your point, everybody's saying, no, I don't see it.
I appreciate saying courage, but I ultimately don't necessarily think that it's what's the driving factor. I think it's survival. You see a lot of entrepreneurs in immigrants, and I don't think necessarily comes from a place of like, don't get me wrong, like moving to a different country and going through that experience is extremely courageous. But I don't think that like the choice of entrepreneurship came from a place of courage. I think it comes from a place of survival, and just needing to just find a way to either find financial security and do something that, or just finding a way to prove yourself. But I think it comes from like survival in the sense of like needing to do what you were meant to do, or like, because if you come here when you've got, what you see in a lot of immigrants, that they might have been very qualified from where they came from. They come here and everything is reset. And then you're given two options, which is just like do a career potentially that is like you're much overqualified to do, and unfortunately the system isn't letting you step into what you're trained to do, or just step into something where you're just going to be in charge yourself and you don't need anybody's permission. And that's what kind of ends up happening.
It does. It absolutely does. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about sort of your first company, but how did you get to Helcim?
It's through the web design. So, as we were getting more clients and starting to becoming a little bit more successful, at least, what success looks like for a 16, 18-year-old.
I can't believe
Um,
that.
this is before the Shopify days. And we
Hmm.
started doing a lot more e-commerce websites. So people would come to us, say, hey, I want to kind of sell something online, is whether it's a service, and I need somebody to program it. So then got into more, I'm a self-taught programmer. So we started more getting into the coding side of things and programming backends and setting up e-commerce from scratch. And then came the question of payments. So they're like, okay, now I got to plug in payment acceptance. And at the time, there was essentially PayPal already, but it already had the reputation it has today, which was terrible. And the only kind of real other option was like going to one of the big banks like Moneris. And that was a very not so pleasant experience to go through. So, and so the gears started turning, going, is there something here? Is this something that we could get into? And ultimately, that started there's kind of two versions of Helcim. There's the Helcim that people see today, which really launched in 2020. And I kept the name primarily because we still had some good 5-star reviews. And I'm like, I'm going to piggyback on that, but it was essentially
Sure.
a new business. But there's the old Helcim, which I'd started over a decade ago, which got into reselling payment services and trying to blend that with e-commerce, and kind of took a lot of like left turns and right turns trying to make it work. But the seed of it was web design, e-commerce, the payment friction, and going, hey, maybe we could do something better than the banks.
But this is what I always like to explore with founders is that, a lot of people can still get to that conclusion. There's something here that needs to be fixed, or I've got an idea for this, but they don't move on it. They don't act on it. Or even if they do, they don't have any idea or the perseverance or resilience that it takes to keep moving on it. Talk a little bit about how you overcame all of that.
I'll still lean on the survival. I mean, it's just like trying to make rent. I had to move in back in my parents a few times because I couldn't afford it. But you've got something in your mind. It's like, I got to figure this out. I want to figure out this opportunity. And then I think you fall into almost like an entrepreneurial trap. And I say that it sounds negative, but I think it's both, where you go down this path. And what's amazing about entrepreneurship is that you develop all of these skills, right? Yet they are not transferable very well on a resume. So you end up going like, well, okay, now I'm 25. I've got this business that's, it's got some success, some not. At least I can pay some basic bills. If you have those dark moments going, like everybody has those, like, do I keep going? Is this what I want to, is this the success I really wanted? Is this, am I actually going to be able to scale this thing? Is this a good idea, bad idea? But then you go like, well, what else am I going to do? Like my resume is getting less and less applicable to like actually finding a job. And that's probably not true. You could probably,
You could probably spin it.
you could
Yeah.
probably spin it, but in your head, you just kind of going like, well, I can't do anything else. I got to figure this out. And I think there's also just for some of us, it's just a determination of like, ultimately wanting to prove to yourself in the world that like you can be the success that you have in your head. And then so you just keep going and going and going. So I think I still go back to, I don't know if it's as much courage as survival.
As survival. I like that too. You said this vision that you have in your head of what you want it to be. Are you there yet?
We're getting closer.
Oh,
So
that's exciting.
the thing with our companies, we started in payments. We were essentially a reseller for the banks. It's the best way I like to describe it is like, think about being like an insurance broker and not the insurance company, right? So like you can build yourself a nice business, you can be successful as a broker, but you're never really in control. Back to that control thing,
Right.
you're never ultimately like you are in the shadow of the insurance company, saying that analogy, right? And for us, we were in the shadow of the bank, and we built ourselves this, a good business, and it was growing. We got up to about 30 people and like staff on hand and 6,000 clients. That felt like a small success, but we ultimately thought like we could do something so drastically different and so much better for the small business customers that we service, but we got to get out of the shadow of the bank. And that took years. It took years and years and years, because ultimately the banks in the payments world and the financial world are still the ones in control. Even if you think about all the doesn't matter any kind of fintech. If you think about like neobanks or anything like that, there's always a bank in the background that has to sponsor them, right? You can't get away with it. So ultimately, we knew that we had to go build those relationships and find a partner that would kind of let us do it on our own. It took many years, many hitting my head against the wall. I literally said to our bank partner at some point in exasperation, look, you've got new comments like Square and Stripe that are essentially like Godzillas in the streets, flipping downtown upside down. And like, yes, you might if you give us this license, you might create a monster out of us, but at least we'll be your monster.
Right.
And
how did they respond to that?
Something clicked finally because they said yes at some point. And then we went down this crazy journey, which ultimately kind of launched Helcim, what you see it in 2020. And to go back to your question, I think we're a whole lot closer in delivering on that mission, that promise than we ever were. But it was quite a twisty road to get there.
I bet. Let's explore the twisty in a minute, but give me the Helcim 101. Where are you today? Where are you at?
We service tens of thousands of customers across Canada and the US, primarily small businesses. And, the word small business kind of gets used a lot. And what does it mean? We really focus on kind of two groups. So we have like traditional, we call it kind of traditional small business. Think about like vets and dentists and accountants and auto mechanics, like the kind of traditional business that typically serviced by a bank. And then now we're starting to get servicing and more to like the startups and tech-enabled businesses. And we're starting to partner with those as well. We have 160 staff. Calgary based, and we're starting to like from our launch in 2020, we're starting to grow really, really quickly. So we did our Series A investment in 2022. We just did our Series B in 2024, and it's exciting. Everything feels on fire and exciting all at once, but that's part of the journey.
It is part of the journey. How does it feel when you're at this stage and you look back and you go, "Wow, I can't believe we've gotten this far"?
You never have, at least I never have that.
Is that right?
I think I probably need to look back and appreciate it more, but like you are so determined on the next step forward, and it's 1,000 little steps, and you're just like, it's so hard to like look up. I wonder if whether it's through whatever's the next kind of giant milestones, whether it's like, I'd love to go IPO, for example. Maybe it's moments like that where you just kind of like have a moment of realization, but even then you're probably just focusing on the next step forward that I don't know when the oh, look at what's been built kind of moment appears.
Wow. I mean, there's so many things I want to ask you about, but let's go back to when you were just a teenager and you're building your business and you've got this line of sight into something that maybe is going to be even bigger. You were so young at the time. Explain to me what it was like being that young and being the boss even. What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I was a terrible boss in many aspects because there's like so little management training. I think the biggest thing was, because we're in fintech, because we're in finance, there was the trying to convince our customers that they could entrust us with their money. That was very challenging. Especially, it gets better because you convince one, then you leverage the hell out of this customer to say like, hey, Jane over here trusts me. Let's go to Bob, and hopefully he can trust me because Jane trusts me. And now Jane and Bob trust me. Okay, maybe Robert can. So it's a kind of. So I think there's that piece, and over time you get bigger and bigger, and that helps. And convincing a bank or any kind of like financial partner to go, like, I mean, we ultimately end up partnering with an American bank, and most of our partnerships have, even though we service both Canada and the US, unfortunately Canadian banks never open a door. They would just like slam the door on her. And I on one side I kind of understand, like, you're 24 years old and you look like a punk and nobody wants to like open the door for you. But on the other side, I think that's something I admired more on the US kind of ecosystem in general, is that they are just more risk forward as a culture. And I think that's part of how we limit ourselves in Canada, is that we're so slow to open doors. And there's especially that kind of the incumbents and those kind of monopolies and oligopolies, like they need to do a better job at fostering. Ultimately, we still have to give a portion of our revenues back to our partner bank. That's how these kind of structures work, right? Mm-hmm. And it's an American bank that's benefiting from that because they open a door, and it could have been money that's going back to a Canadian entity, and it's not. And so
they have some work to do for sure. Yeah. I also think about the cultural aspect of it too. Like, Americans maybe, yet to your point, what you said, they're less risk averse, and there's that sort of fear in Canada still. And I wonder if that will change over time. What do you think?
I think that we need to, as a nation. We launched our services in Canada, and when we were about to launch in the US, we had this fear of like, oh, will they want to do business with the Canuck? And and the reaction was so different. It actually surprised us because I think this is a bit of a stereotype, but I think Canadians in general are so much more risk adverse that, convincing them to switch from like, yeah, they hate their bank. The bank has bad contract, bad fees, bad everything. Yet they're just like, oh, but I don't know. I kind of, I kind of, I kind of trust it, or
Yeah.
versus. First of all, what was different is that there is none of that loyalty to the big incumbent banks in the U.S. Like nobody's like loyal to, or at least nobody, but like the majority, you don't see this default loyalty from consumers and businesses in the States towards like Citibank or Bank of America. Like they don't think that way, right? They're like, you got a good reputation, you got the right rates, let's do business. Like it's just the doors open so much easier. It's a different mindset. And I think there's so many wonderful things about our country in terms of like the foundation of it, the safety net in terms of our social programs, the STEM concentration, the education. Like we have so many good, we are a smart, clever nation. And there's so many good things that could be, or more good things that could be happening for us. But we just play it too safe. Toby, the founder of Shopify, said recently, it's like Canada's the country that goes for bronze.
Yes.
And I mean, that hits hard. I'm sure there's a lot of entrepreneurs on this podcast that go like, wow, that's not, it's like, I get it, but I do think that there's a nugget of truth in there that we need to kind of get out of our shell more and flex what we've got.
Flex it. Yeah. Yeah. Because it's pretty special. Yeah. The Founder Mindset is brought to you by ATB Financial. In the fast-paced world of tech, your banking needs evolve as quickly as your industry. Whether you're just starting out or aiming to reach new heights, ATB Financial is dedicated to supporting tech companies every step of the way. Partner with ATB Financial for a banking solution that grows with your business. Let's talk a little bit now about what it's like to be you managing a company when you've got, what did you say, 150, 160 employees now? Yeah. How is that different than when you're a 25-year-old punk?
Yeah, I mean, everybody warned me at like the 80 to 100 employee mark. That's when everything changes, and it's definitely it. You can't know everybody's names. Communication becomes super important. That's I think some of the growing pains we had been going through are around like management layers, and you realize that like at 20 people, even at 50 people, the way that you manage, the way that you set the culture can really kind of influence the whole company. But at a certain point, it's absolutely your one or two layers down from you that are actually setting the expectations of culture and performance and expectations and everything. And unless you really invest into that, it just doesn't quite materialize to what you want it to be. So we've kind of realized that we've been investing more heavily into it. It's difficult. I think some people really thrive in a smaller company. Some people like, kind of the entrepreneurs I talk to are like, at a certain size, I just want to sell. That's not, but I think others, like I did the small business thing for a long time, and now I'm just like eager to learn more. And even, I'd love to go public and really create Helcim into one of the kind of anchor tech tenants of the city, kind of like what Shopify did in, for Toronto and Ottawa. And then people go, well, you don't want to be a publicly traded CEO. That sounds awful. And I'm like, there's pros and cons to everything, but I'm just ready to learn the next steps of that journey, not stay stale.
Yeah, you don't strike me as one that would be like just plateauing. Yeah, you're climbing always.
That's the goal.
That's the goal. Exciting. But being an entrepreneur, of course, has a lot of demands on you and your time. I'm really curious about how you manage being an entrepreneur and an aggressive builder with having a family life.
That's a tricky, loaded conversation. I have a newborn, 8 weeks old at
8
home.
weeks
So
old.
my first, thank you.
Congratulations.
It's an amazing amount of love and chaos all at once.
Isn't it?
I'm a believer that you can have it all. You just can't have it all at once. And I don't know if you ever heard about the four burner theory. So it's essentially about like, I'm a big believer in like compromise and trade-offs, because I don't think you can all have it all at once. And a four burner theory is essentially you only have, think about like a stove top, right? With four burners, right? And it's like one of them is family, one of them is friends, one of them is health, and one of them is professional success. And you only have so much gas. You cannot run all those things at the same time. And you really have to make the choices of like, how are you throttling those burners? It can get a little bit drastic in terms of like, if you want to be good at something, you got to turn off one. If you want to be great at something, you got to turn off two.
Right.
That gets a little bit cringy. So let me be more towards like the modulation of what that means.
Sure.
But ultimately it's tricky. I mean, you have to make choices in terms of, for me, the financial success and the business success and what I want to create and the impact I want to make for the city and for myself and for this company and for our small customers is super important. And it's a huge part of my drive. And I don't have many friends because of that. And that's one of the burners that, unfortunately kind of goes, right?
Yeah.
And even when it comes to like personal time or anything like that, like I'm a believer in having not like a no compromise one thing that you're willing to like say, like, and for me it's sleep, which is super, like, some people it's working out, some people it's time with watching a movie or whatever is, whatever is, you're kind of like, no, you're no compromise. For me it's sleep. So I've had to do, and that's harder with a newborn.
I was going to say, how does that work with a newborn?
But it's like, what else am I willing to sacrifice and compromise on and turn off and really like, and just going like, okay, my priorities are spending time with my wife and my newborn son, spending as much as I can into the business and seeing if I can get a little bit of the, sleep in there, and everything else kind of goes out the window. And, is that, I think a lot of people would kind of not find that the ideal for themselves, but I don't see it as a forever thing.
Mhm.
I see it as, I want to hit a certain level, and hopefully it's ultimate delayed gratification, right? So it's like, you just, I used to joke about like freedom 30 and then freedom 35, and I'm almost 40, so it's freedom 45 is what I'm aiming for. But it's just like making that choice of like, I'm going to have to make a whole lot of compromises in a lot of aspects of my life because I want the entrepreneurial burner to burn so hot. And hopefully I'm in a position later in life that I can shift those burners and enjoy the fruits of that labor.
It sounds like you've been very mindful of those 4 burners, that you're very aware of what this looks like when you have to throttle it. It's not something that you just sort of forget about. It sounds like you're mindful of it, like that you might like think of those 4 burners every day.
If you don't have your eyes open going into this thing, it's just going to like smack you on the side of the head. So like, because I mean, it's so demanding. It's such a, at least, being aware of like knowing what you want and knowing what the trade-offs are and knowing where you need to compromise, knowing where you need to ask for compromises from others. And it helps, at least, being aware of it helps navigate the roller coaster and the emotions of it all. So.
Let's talk about those roller coaster of emotions. I mean, I hear it all the time when they're in the chair there. It is so many super, super highs and super, super lows. Would you agree?
It's interesting that, and how fast it switches. So you can start the day feeling like you're the king of the world, and like maybe you got a big contract or you got, some like huge news on something, and end the day with like feeling like you are terrible what you're doing and it's all falling apart. And like it happens, daily, weekly, monthly. It's the highs are highs, the lows are lows. I know that's cliche, but that's like certainly part of it. And I wish I was, one thing I'm trying to work on this year more is like celebrating the small things more, because they kind of help you even out a bit. But yeah, it's definitely a roller coaster.
I hear this, and as a non-entrepreneur, I'm thinking to myself, like, why would you do this to yourself? But it sounds like for you, you had no other choice.
Yeah, I mean, or at least in my head, I had no other
Yes.
choice. Or at least it feels like, now without getting a little bit too kooky, but it feels a little bit like manifest destiny in terms of like you're doing what you were supposed to do. Even if it's a, crazy journey and there's just, moments of near death or anything like that. Like, it's just, like, you feel like you're like, this is my path.
Okay, so how do you negotiate those near death moments when you're right down at the bottom?
Well, I'll give you one. Like, we had just like 2 years ago, we had just closed our Series A, top of the world again.
Yeah.
You're feeling like, oh my God, like this is a huge milestone. First time bringing in institutional investors. And 2 weeks after closing our Series A, we've been working on a physical product called our Smart Terminal, which is allowing more established businesses to accept payments, and you kind of see those at the countertop with a big bright screen. And we've been working with this manufacturer in Hong Kong, and it's been like, it was $1 million plus investment and kind of putting everything together. We're about to put in a big manufacturing with them 2 weeks after the close, and then they ghost us. And we're just like, what's going on? This is an established company. There's others in the space using them. Like, what's going on? And then we get a notice, like a kind of official legal notice, saying that they've just been acquired by one of our competitors, Stripe, and they're turning us off. It was one of those moments where you go from a crazy high to a crazy low. I hadn't even had my first board meeting yet. First time having a board meeting,
What?
first time having a board. And the first thing I need to do is like set up an emergency board meeting and saying like, we've just lost our manufacturer, Stripe kicked us out. That was definitely a low. And then you're kind of going into, you kind of have to get, you kind of like, kind of curl up in a ball for about 24 hours, and then you get out of it and you're like, okay, we got to go everywhere in the world to find who else can help us with that. And you go through this whole journey, and ultimately it was a multi-year journey. We ended up finding an amazing partner out of Taiwan that ultimately we think worked out better. But yeah, it's just those are the roller coasters that you're riding. It's also a reminder that you're trying to take on banks. You're trying to take on huge, tech startups, like some of the biggest names in not just in payments, but the biggest names in tech, like Square and Stripe and PayPal. Like they're monsters, right? And they've got really big feet with really big toes, and they can crush your toes once in a while. Those are the moments that test you of like how determined are you, and how much do you believe in your mission, and how much do you believe there's a space for you in this market to really decide, like, do you keep going?
What does it feel like when you're curled up in the ball on the floor that 24 hours?
Everybody's story looks shiny on the outside, right? You see success stories, and then you just assume that it was just all kind of success.
Sure, easy, yeah.
And I think that there are some circumstances, like we look at the lotteries, you look at Mark Zuckerberg and
Right.
Facebook, you're like,
Yes.
oh, that's what entrepreneurs. And I'm like, that's the lottery. Like that's just winning
that's
the
not
golden
real.
ticket. Like, not to take away from his efforts and everything they
Of
did,
course.
but it's just, that's not a clear example. But I think in those moments, those kind of like, near death entrepreneurial experiences, like you start questioning like the imposter syndrome kicks in hard, right? You're like, am I terrible negotiator? Am I terrible at business? Am I terrible at this? Am I just kidding myself? Like that absolutely runs through your head. And I would say to any entrepreneurs listening to this, like it's just like you are not alone. It's just even the ones that find more success, everybody is going through that pretty continuously. And I think that's a fun part about entrepreneurs talking to other entrepreneurs, and you kind of start sharing some of those like F up stories and near death stories and everything. And you're like, oh, okay, maybe it's messy everywhere.
I mean, that's one of the reasons why I love this podcast, not to toot my own horn, but just because I get to talk to founders about those moments and how did you move through it? So I've got to ask you, so you're curled up in the ball, it's 24 hours later. How did you go, okay, let's lose the imposter syndrome and just keep moving forward? What was happening for you?
And entrepreneurs will recognize this. You start making a list of like, what's the problem we're trying to solve and who can help us solve it and who knows who. And then you just lose any fear of conflict or rejection or anything, and you just pick up the phone or start sending out emails, and then one thing leads to another, and you start exploring. And I think you just do.
You just do. And does the doing help with the emotional impact of it? Because I'm imagining like emotionally, that's got to hurt.
I think it allows you to feel a little bit more in control, whatever little control you have, right? And I think ultimately, I remember seeing a Twitter about like, the thing about this modern kind of information-based economy and this, technology that we build, right? It's kind of like, it's a lot of like, if you just hit the right keys on the keyboard in the right order enough, then you win at the end. Like, it's just like thinking about, and what I like about that is that like thinking about like ultimately, like as long as we're breathing, as long as we have the means to keep going, there's a path. You just have to keep trying.
Wow. And thank you for saying, you're not alone out there to all the other founders listening to this that are just a little bit farther behind. It's so true. Okay, so we're jumping back to present day now. And you've talked a little bit about how sleep is really important to you, but are there other things that you do to really fill up your own personal tank to stay well and keep going?
Probably not as much as I would want to. I find ways to kind of get a workout in, and that helps with like the anxiety and it helps with the sleep. And then spending time with my wife and my son now is probably the best way that I get and kind of rejuvenate. But I've always been somebody that's willing to sacrifice a lot. And in the end, I love my work. I genuinely like, that doesn't mean I love every day, but I feel very fortunate to do what I do. And so that like, it doesn't matter if you throw me a marketing problem or a supply chain problem or whatever. It's just like, oh, cool. I get to type on the keyboard and come up with a plan and interact with people. And if you have a general love of business.
Mhm.
And I think that's what, kind of going a little into payments. On the surface, people are like, oh, payments sounds boring, right? Like, if you're at a cocktail party, I don't know. I don't know the last time I was at a cocktail party, but let's pretend I was at a cocktail party and people ask about like, what do you do? Payments. On the surface, that sounds boring. But what I love about it is that if you have a love of business, you get a front row seat into so many companies and the way that they operate. We service everything from a restaurant to a brewery to a tire manufacturer to an embassy to a theater to like everything and just everything in between, right? Like, and if you love business, you really get to explore an amazing range of just like how the world or how the kind of the economic heartbeat works. And payments gives us a front row seat. And then so like that love, I think, is a part of the reason I'm in this industry. And ultimately that love of business in general um allows you to just take on the next challenge and be like, oh, this, I just find every topic interesting and good, because like every day seems to be like I'm tackling a different topic. So
Right, right. That's so interesting. So that leads nicely into this notion of impact. At Thinner Labs, we talk about creating meaningful human impact, and impact comes up a lot in these conversations. When you think about creating impact, what does that mean for you and for Helcim?
yeah, it's a good question. I'm not going to pretend that like there's so many startups that work, in health tech or clean tech or in charitable givings or so on, that I think could more directly link what they do to like a positive impact in the world. Um, I process credit cards. Like it's
Yeah.
just not as thrilling on the surface. But I mean, we do like, our mission is to be the world's most loved payments company. That's a bit of an oxymoron because nobody loves their payments, but we really mean it. We think that, like, I think that came from a falling in love with small businesses and the ones that gave me a shot, and like seeing how poorly they are treated to this day by some of the big names I mentioned, and going like, yeah, we can do better. And that seems like a righteous kind of like mission, because ultimately like, small businesses account for 90+% of employment in our economy, and they deserve a shot. So I think that keeps us. And when we have people that when people join, when we say like, working at a startup is really demanding, and you really have to find behind the job, why are you here? Some people are here because they love the culture that we've created and love working with super kind of talent dense people. Some people are here because they come from a small business background, or their parents came from a small business background, and they wanted to have that impact and they believe in the mission, right? Some people are at our company because they love the idea of building and having that impact in Calgary in terms of the tech ecosystem that we're building and being part of something big. And ultimately, for me, it's probably a combination of all of those things. But you gotta anchor when you're part of a startup. You gotta anchor yourself to like one of those things, because there's going to be some like hair on fire moments and you go like, wow, I can make better money somewhere else. Why am I here? And it's like, well, outside of the stock options, there has to be a reason that keeps you driven.
I totally understand that link. I hear what you're saying about the link to the life science companies, for example. That's a direct, easy sight line to the impact. But yeah, when you think of those small business owners and the impact they're creating and the impact that you're having on them, that's huge.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, like, it's cliche, but we think they deserve better. They don't deserve, 3-year contracts and hidden fees and terrible customer service and banks that take them for granted. And it's, on one side, we're very fortunate because we get to sell a service that is a must-have. Small business down will turn off their lights before they turn off their payment machine because they need to get paid. But on the other side, we also get compete with a lot of D players in this space. A lot of like old school banks that kind of have taken it for granted. So we love kind of coming in, being like, they deserve better, we can do better, and our competitors aren't trying that hard. So it's a nice
You
place to
like
be.
shaking it up.
Yeah.
He's got a huge grin on his face right now, just for the record. Okay, so when we think about wrapping this up, you're the founder, you're writing the story for Helcim and for your company. How do you hope the story goes?
Ultimately, I mentioned a few times, I would love to take the company public when we get to the right size, and for a number of reasons. It's not, I don't see going public as as an exit. Sure, it brings liquidity, and that's nice for everyone involved, investors and stakeholders and employees, and but ultimately, I see it, going public brings you into the public conversation. the way that private companies typically don't, right? I think so all of a sudden you become part of the public discourse. You become, like, and then all of a sudden
Why
that,
is that important?
I mean, there's the kind of very selfish element of that, which is like brand awareness. But I also think that like it helps put the city that you're working, in and that you love. And I really do love Calgary, on the map. And I think that ultimately success would be, we grow the company to the size where it's a meaningful player in the Canadian space, the US space. And then when people think of like, oh, what's tech in Calgary? It's like Helcim. Just like Shopify was able to do that for Toronto. And I think they were kind of like the really kind of big beacon for that city. And I think we could do that right here in Calgary. And that would be just a stepping stone to just build world domination while helping our small business customers.
I love it. I love it. And then as a founder, you're a founder of this incredible company. How do you hope your personal story goes?
I mean, I'd love to continue to build a team that just that talent density and that kind of the drive for excellence that ultimately is able to go and spin off into all of their own adventures and just help build the ecosystem into, what it can be.
Nic, thank you for this conversation.
Thanks for having me.
As the lead investor in Thin Air Labs Fund 1, Sandstone Asset Management believes in building the commons through innovative founders who are creating meaningful positive impact both locally and globally. Sandstone is doing just that by backing the next generation of emerging entrepreneurs. Picture this. A founder's startup goes from idea to international impact, supported by strategic investors who believed in their vision. That's the power of Sandstone's approach. Sandstone doesn't just manage wealth, they cultivate it, supporting founders at all stages. Visit sandstoneam.com to learn how Sandstone builds legacies that last. Calgary is a city of innovative companies, ideas, and talent. The Opportunity Calgary Investment Fund is investing in Calgary's future by finding, fueling, and fostering innovation to build a diverse and resilient economy. Find out more at opportunitycalgary.com.